Great. So I'm just going to do the foundational introduction to today's informational webinar. I think I know most of you, but maybe not. I'm Beth Fisher-Yoshida, Program Director of the NECR program. And this is a joint effort between NECR and the MD-ICCCR with the Columbia University Advanced Lab on Conflict Intelligence, which is what we are calling this series of workshops that we're going to be hosting in June. And it's the first part of a two-part series, and it's on conflict intelligence. And then in January, we'll have a second part on systemic wisdom. And all of this is a pilot that we're putting together. So just setting the context a little bit. One is that the MD-ICCCR does a lot of their own original research and developing that into practice and education. NECR builds on a lot of that research, education, practice, and so on. And for many years, we've worked together. And for many years, we've always wanted to continue to advance the learning that students get in the program and in the MD-ICCCR certificate. And we want to do that and keep lifelong learning alive and well and functioning. And so we've always had an interest in doing that. Some of you may have even participated in previous advanced labs that we've done, such as the DST Advanced Lab several years ago. Another reason why we're doing this now is because, I don't know if you've heard, but there's been COVID out there. And so for the past 2 years, a lot of education has been disrupted or reformatted into being online, being virtual. And so a lot of students who agreed to come to the NECR program, come to the certificate program at the MD-ICCCR, we're doing it virtually with the hope and anticipation that one day they'd be able to do something in person. And we had promised that when that day does come, which I think is coming now, that we would be very happy to offer something. So because of that, we put together this whole series of workshops. There'll be 3 workshops. You'll hear more about the content of them. I'm just sort of setting the stage to get us going. And then Peter Coleman and Bodi Regan will also talk about it. And then we will have Kirsten and Danielle talking about the application process, because there will be an application process. Once again, the NECR is defraying most of the costs, thank you, generous SPS, because we had made a commitment to our students who now I believe are our alumni. And now we have alumni from before COVID, back in the day when we really were in person. I think before we even had the hybrid program, which started about 5 years ago. So I'm going to stop there. We will have time at the end of our webinar session after our presentations to answer your questions, maybe address some of your concerns. And I'm wondering if Peter is on, because I know that Peter was in transit from a class he was teaching before this session. And if he is, then he could take over. If not, then we will switch and go into the, oh, he's not on. Okay, so then what I'm going to do, so you have to really be agile here in the moment, I'm going to turn it over to Danielle and Kirsten, who are going to be talking about the application process. So you can apply for what you don't even know what it is, but trust us, it'll be great. And then when Peter comes, we'll put Peter on so he can talk about the content of what you're signing up for.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Beth. And thanks to everyone for joining us and your interest in this pilot program. I'm going to start sharing my screen and we can just look over the application together. And as a reward for signing up for this webinar, you're actually the first people who get to lay eyes on the application. So give me one moment as I take over the screen or attempt to. There we go. So you will, after this webinar, we will be sending you the link to our summer application. It is a Google form, not meant to be overly complicated, but what you will see is that the application deadline is April 1st. So please turn this in well before then. We do ask for your name, your Columbia Uni. If you are having trouble finding that or remembering that, just please leave a note and we can help you find that in the future. And your affiliation, again, this pilot right now is only open to NECR alumni and MD-ICCCR certificate alumni. And then we're just asking you for some more information. And then also you just have the opportunity to share why you're interested in participating in this pilot. Of course, during the session, you'll learn a lot more about the pilot. And you will also be able to register for, or at least express your interest in which sessions or days you would like to attend. We certainly hope you can attend all of them, but if you're only able to give us 1 or 2 days, that is fine as well. So you can share your preferences here. And then there is a $250 deposit that we will ask for if you're, oh, that should say April 15th, that if you are accepted, there is a one-time flat fee of $250 to participate in this pilot. And as Beth mentioned, NECR is taking care of the costs to present this opportunity to you. So this is the document you will soon see. And Danielle, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything.
I think this is it. Thank you so much, Kirsten.
Okay, fabulous. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I believe Peter is on.
Peter's here, yes. Okay.
Wonderful. Okay.
Peter who? Peter Coleman. Oh, me, that's me. Hi, everybody. I'm not sure who's here, but I think there's a group of us here that I think we've all met before. So my task is to sort of give you a little bit of a taste or overview of what it is, this thing that we're proposing to do. This is a pilot. It's an experiment. We're all guinea pigs in this. This is the first time we've done anything like this. But basically, we started to think about what would be a kind of next level of education for, students and learners that have been through either the certificate program at the center or the NECR master's program and want to come back and sort of take things to the next level. So we have spent time over the last almost year, I think. Oh, that's a lot of information quickly. Let's go to the beginning, back up to the beginning.
There. Next.
Keep going. You can leave it there. All right, go to the next one.
You want slide 2, right?
Yes.
Slide
2, Danielle. Thank you.
The idea was to identify a series of modules that many of you had pieces of or were exposed to some of the models or ideas in your education with us previously. But now we would like to work with you kind of as professionals in a professional development capacity to think about, what would be the next level of working with these ideas. So we put these into these 7 modules, and they can be, as Kirsten indicated or suggested, they could be done either as a whole, so that you could actually go through the whole sequence, and that could result in some kind of certificate eventually, advanced certificate, or any one particular module, right? So you could decide, oh, I'm really interested in adaptive mediation. That's what I'm working on more and more these days, and I want to understand how to do that. And so the way that we've designed this is that each module will be at least part of a day or a full day. And again, you can sign up for the whole thing or parts of it. Now we've split it now, this pilot phase, into 2 chunks. The first one will be happening in June, this coming June, and that will be the first 4 modules here. The sort of your examining, reflecting on you and your competencies today, and your theory of change and conflict a little bit, the power and conflict dynamics from making conflict work, adaptive mediation, research and practice, and then something we call cross-cultural optimality, which is being able to work in both prescriptive and elicitive ways, kind of working across cultures in a more culturally sensitive way, and bringing your own insights and value in some kind of optimal balance. So those will be the first 4 modules that we offer this summer, and we can go a little bit more into detail about what that looks like. And then our hope is that next January, I think, we will offer the other 3 modules. So the first 4 are in the category of what we call conflict intelligence. They're using different kinds of strategies or tactics in different kinds of situations in ways that fit those situations. And that is a concept familiar to many of you, but that's what the first 4 are. The second three, the getting in sync, leveraging conflict for DEIAJ, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and justice, and the way out, are all applying and working with more difficult, entrenched, long-term conflicts or problems. And so that's moving into the area that we call systemic wisdom. As you know, it's a different paradigm than a lot of the mainstream conflict work we do. It's moving more into complexity, science, and systems, and all of that. And yes, and it's informed by these challenges that we have. But let me just kind of finish the overview. So the hope is that the first session we'll do for a half day, 3 to 4 hour session. I think it's on June 11th. Is that right, Tristan? Yes?
Yes, sorry, yes.
And that will be virtual. So that will be an online session that we'll do, and we'll send you some assessments, and then we'll, again, this will be highly experiential. And then at the end of June, I think it's starting on is it the 21st that will be the dinner?
The 21st is the dinner, yes.
So then we'll come together face to face at the end of June for a few days. It'll start with a dinner on the evening of the 21st. And then on the 22nd, we'll have a day-long module on navigating power and conflict. And Bodi, Regan is going to head that up, probably with others, or maybe Bodi and I can't remember how we've allotted this. But then the next day, will be focused on adaptive mediation. And I believe I will do that with a colleague or colleagues, Josh Flax, who's a federal mediator, and maybe Javier Ramirez, who is currently waiting Senate confirmation as the director of the Federal Mediation Conciliation Services. If we can get his time, we'd like to bring him in, at least for part of the adaptive mediation day module. And then the last day on cross-cultural optimality will be myself and Lan Fan, who's a PhD student who's working directly with me on research in that area. So that will be that week. Again, dinner on the 21st, and then the 22nd is navigating power, 23rd is adaptive mediation, 24th is cross-cultural optimality, and then that will end the first half of the section. Let me just say, let's push ahead if you can, Danielle. Go a couple of slides ahead. I'll tell you when to stop. Yeah, we can start here. So just to describe what we're aspiring to do with these is that we hope that this experience will build on your educational experiences with us in the past, but will again be a more kind of immersive experience, these kind of full day modules. There'll be 7 building blocks that can be taken to get together or not. They all will involve some kind of conflict competency assessment and feedback report. Some of you may have done, but they would be good to do again to sort of see where you are currently in terms of your development and your go-to responses. Okay, I think that's enough of this. So go ahead if you can, another slide or 2. Next one. So this is what we propose as a prototype for the modules. We don't expect you, we're not going to give you a bunch of readings and books to read. You're welcome to have the books if you want them. We can make them available, but this is not deep into the science and theory. It's really about the application of this in your professional life. So we are in the process of drafting what we call HBR-like articles that will sort of capture the theme in a very accessible kind of, like Harvard Business Review article-like way of each of the models or each of the approaches. So we'll give you that beforehand to read, just as a kind of reminder or refresher at a high level of what the particular model is. Then what we hope to do with each session is use apps. We start with an app. So if some of you are familiar with the fact that there are these, that we have developed what we call the Making Conflict Work app, right? And so it looks a little bit like that, if you can see it. It's free to download on your phone. And as you know, it's what we call a just-in-time tool. So what I've learned in teaching the power model, the making conflict work approach to different executives, is that they find the apps particularly useful tools to use. I interviewed a woman yesterday who's an executive out of Chicago, and she was saying, I had heard that one of my key staff members was going to leave because they were unhappy. And what my impulse was to just call them in and try to talk about it. But then she said, I thought, well, let me try to use this app and see if that will help me. And she said, what it helped me do is not rush into a conversation unprepared, but really try to think through, well, what is the nature of the particular situation that I'm in, or what are some possible strategies, and what's probably important to them and what's important to me. And then to have a conversation that was much more structured and she felt like she had much more control of, and ultimately was a much more useful kind of conversation for her. So these are again, just simple apps. We're about to launch one on adaptive mediation. We hope to have one on cross-cultural adaptivity soon as well. And so what we hope to do is bring you in with this brief article you've read and move you right into a case. You have a case that you want to think through that involves power dynamics and conflict, for example, and you're going to use the app, and that's where you start, is with your case and thinking through the practical challenges or realities of that. We'll do those in small groups. We'll talk about those. So these are really relying on your current challenges and experiences and just using the heuristic of this simple app. Then we can use that to sort of teach and talk about some of the content, some of the research, if that's useful. Eventually, we'll go to the assessments, which are individualized assessments of you, the conflict intelligence assessment. There's an adaptive mediation suite of assessments that we have. There's a cross-cultural adaptivity assessment that we have. And again, these are then opportunities for you to get individualized feedback and think about the things that maybe you want to work on. There'll be some kind of what we call life hacks, which are kind of will encourage you to apply this to pieces of your life. So that's the basic idea of how these modules will work, is that they'll be light on theory and research, heavy on your experience, your application to your work and your life and your challenges, and thinking about how do you start to immerse yourself in each of these particular models or approaches in ways that will serve you where you are professionally right now. That's the objective. Danielle, let's go just ahead one or two. So again, let me just quickly say what the first four modules are, and then I'll pass it off. But the first module is the CIQ conflict competencies, or the CC360 that we talk about, your implicit theory of conflict and change, which you may have done recently or may not have, but we really want to explore how you think about your attempts to change conflicts and where your current thinking of that is. And then we have this relatively new assessment, the conflict anxiety response scale, which will give you feedback, and the conflict competency scale. So what we'll probably do, I think we've discussed, is we'll touch on some of this in the first session together. And then what we will encourage is small groups of you to go off and complete particularly the conflict competency 360. It's a 360 assessment that not many of our recent students have been exposed to. And then you'll process those in small groups between that June 11th date and our meeting together on the 21st. So that will be, again, a 4-hour plus the interim work time where you're reflecting on you and your competencies and skills around dealing with emotions, dealing with conflicts, and your kind of skill tendencies. Go to the next slide, please. Then again, that's it. This is the making conflict work model and approach. And again, this will be another attempt to immerse yourself in the value and utility of this approach, apply it to your work and your life. This is part of our basic now that that Bodi's designed. It's a component of the basic. This will take it further and get you much more deeply into that. Let's go to the next one. Adaptive mediation is a relatively new model that we've developed, and we've really sort of fleshed this out in much more detail. We have now updated assessments for you to assess your competencies or comfort in working with certain kinds of derailers in mediation, as well as there is an app that you'll use. So you'll come in with a case that you want to think through. You'll apply the app to that case, and that's where we'll start this. Then eventually go to the assessments and exploration of that. So that's the third module, and then the fourth is cross-cultural adaptivity, navigating international or cross-cultural differences effectively. This too is a relatively recent area of research. Not all of you were exposed to this model or this approach. We do have assessments for this, and there's ongoing research that will present the findings of this, because ultimately the objective is to not, in John Paul Lederach's terms, work only elicitively, which is in a purely culturally centered way, or prescriptively, which is just to come in with a model, but it is to find some kind of hybrid experience that ultimately is respectful and sustainable in the culture that you're working in, as well as informed by whatever ideas or methods you're introducing. So it is about finding ways to do that. And that's something that we're currently doing specific research on. So that's the idea. The idea is that these 4 modules will be the beginning of this 7-module offering. These are all what we like to see as next level immersive educational experiences on this. It'll depend on who's in the room, what your cases are, what your challenges are. So it will be very idiosyncratic to every time we do this. But we're looking to, sort of partner with you as colleagues to provide a set of experiences where we can learn from each other about all of these models moving forward. That's my overview. And let me turn it over to whoever is next.
Hi, this is Bodi. Thank you very much, Peter. Hi, everyone. It's great to be part of this pilot. I just wanted to say a few things about the added value, I believe, to practitioners in playing this playing in this pilot with us. I think one of the main opportunities here is really taking a deeper dive in this cutting edge research, stuff that really has not been shared widely in the field, other than, sort of through the books that Peter has put out, mainly Making Conflict Work and the 5%. But what we're trying to do with all of you is to allow you to bring in your challenges, what you faced or what you will be facing as practitioners, and use these models to be more effective in your professional life, and also we believe in our personal lives. So I think there's a lot of added value here. The other thing I believe participants will take away is this interaction with your colleagues who are also practitioners and have a good foundation for some of the foundational theory. I know in my courses, the negotiation courses that I've taught and the mediation courses that I've taught, these new, more recent cutting edge research and concepts we get to touch on, but we don't get to take a deep dive just because the time in the course doesn't really allow for it. However, in the pilot, we will take a deep dive. So every one of you will have an opportunity to bring in a live case that you've working on or you've experienced, so that you can really apply the model, see how it works, give us feedback about what works, or maybe we need to think differently or in new ways. The other exciting part is that while we won't be spending a lot of time on the underlying theory or research, what we will be doing is providing diagnostic techniques, because there are frameworks for each one of these models that allow you to assess the situation that you're in and apply the strategies effectively. So you will walk away with specific diagnostics for each situation that you're in. For example, the navigating conflict at work or the power conflict model, what you'll really walk away with are the 3 basic conflict questions related to power. That we talk about in the introduction to negotiation course, also the basic negotiation course at the ICCCR, but students don't get a lot of time to really apply that model to a case that they're working with. So you'll have a diagnostic tool for that. You'll then understand the typical 7 situations that you would find yourself in an organizational setting, and then what strategies apply more specifically to those situations. So we won't spend a lot of time on those underlying concepts, but you will walk away with clarity about how to diagnose your situation effectively. Same with the mediation model. You'll have a real sense as to what is adaptive mediation, how is it different than the standard practice, and how to navigate between the two, how to go back and forth to be a more effective practitioner. So I really, encourage all of you to apply for the pilot. I think that I definitely will be learning from all of you, and anticipate that what we have to offer will further along your practitioner expertise. So that's all I wanted to say right now, and certainly we'll open it up for questions. So is there anything else from Beth or Peter before we open it up?
Not at this time. I'm ready for Q&A.
I'm going to just say we're excited about this. We think this will be a fun learning opportunity. This is something new we've never done before, so we'll make all kinds of mistakes, but we'll do it together and we'll learn a ton.
I did answer 2 questions before in the chat. One person asked, I think Iksa asked if it's during the day or at night, and I mentioned it's during the day, except of course for the dinner. And then somebody else asked about the application link, which I said would be shared after this. And now Michelle's asking, how many people will this pilot accept? I think we were aiming for up to 20 per session, but let's see if there's a stampede and we'll figure it out what happens. But I think we were thinking that that would be an optimal size. So ideally 10 to 20, which is, I know, a big range, but you want to have enough where people can be interactive, but not be too big where you can't really answer people. I'm wondering, do people have the opportunity to unmute themselves if they want to ask a question, or do they have to do the Q&A?
Will be through the Q&A because we have it set up as a webinar.
Great. All right, so please, oh, there's another one. I should just keep the box open, right? Could you share more about the selection process? I guess we could. Have we thought, I think I'll just say one thing and then we'll add into that. It really needs to be where this is building on previous learning and experience, right? So that's why it's open to alumni to start out with, because we want to make the assumption that you have a foundation through the program and through the MD-ICCCR certificate program. So that's a starting point. So I think as long as you qualify for that, then we can see, but you also, I mean, the application doesn't ask for too much more info. It doesn't really ask for a whole lot about what you're doing and all that. So that's the basic criteria. Peter and Bodi, did you want to add anything to that?
I'll just add that, I think we're going to be really curious as to what the applicant hopes to learn. What's the expectation for your own learning? What are your learning goals? And maybe how this fits into where you are as a practitioner and where you want to be.
Yeah, I was just reminded that one of the things that we also had talked about, that if there is this stampede of people rushing to the gates, then we would privilege the people who are most directly impacted by not being able to come to campus during COVID. That was our original intent in doing this. And then, of course, in partnering with the MD-ICCCR, it grew into something more. And this is, like we said, pilot, so it will continue to grow and evolve. So do you have a slide or list with an overview of which modules are happening which days? So if you look at this arc that's up here now on the screen, you can see that the number 1 module will be the online module on June 11th. And then you have the number 2 will be on June 22nd. Then number 3 will be June 23rd. Number 4 will be June 24th. The other 5, 6, and 7 will be in January, sometime during that break, but we haven't decided the dates yet. You don't need to attend all sessions. We would love it if you could, but that's why on the application form, there are 3 different check marks for each of the days. There is an assumption that you must attend one, the first one online, because that really sets the foundation for these modules, but then you can attend 2, 3, or 4, or 2, 3, and 4, any combination of those.
And I also think in that module 1, Beth, the online module that Peter will lead, it's also an opportunity for participants to do some fundamental assessments that will then be used through the other modules.
Correct. Are we to assume that each session may consist of different participants? It could. My guess is that, especially if you're traveling to come here, that some people may be here for all 3 days, but I think there'll be some variation from day to day. We're going to live in the unknown mystery of the world and see what emerges.
It sounds very much like systemic wisdom, Beth.
By the time January comes, maybe I'll have some. Can you please clarify the pricing? Is there a $250 deposit and addition? Okay, there's one flat fee of $250, whether you attend 1 full day workshop or 3. And we're doing that this time because 2 reasons. Number 1, it's a pilot. So that's the pricing for now. And also because SPS had been generous to us when we requested money to provide these special workshops. And that's how we're able to defray the costs. So in the real world, without all these other conditions, it wouldn't be $250, but for this one time, and in January, it'll be a $250 for the workshops. It's a learning together, as Peter mentioned and Bodi mentioned. So we want to have you experience the workshops. We want to get your feedback and input, and then we can continue to refine them.
I have a question for the participants that are on the call or on the webinar, which is, are there ideas or offerings in these categories that we've laid out that you'd like us to consider adding to the process? Do you have ideas on how to make these more useful and engaging for you?
What I'm going to say is that no, all 7 workshops are not $250. The first 4 are $250. There will be another $250 for the second batch in January. Different budget years, you know. You're welcome. Yeah, and if anybody has a response to Peter's question, please just type it in the Q&A box since that's what's open. And if anybody has a request to have us review anything or go into a little bit more depth on any point, we do have some more time.
I guess the only other thing I would say is, so what we're trying to do is generate interest in this. This, as Beth has indicated, is our attempt to, reintroduce a sense of community after a COVID time when we've all been insulated and isolated so much, and often alienated from others. So it's a time to try to come together. So if there are members of your cohort that you think might be interested, please reach out and share this information with them. Tell them what you learned today. ask them if they have questions to reach out to us, but spread the word and let's try to get a good group to come together for this first session post-COVID, hopefully.
We just got a suggestion to open up the chat, and I think that's a good idea if we can do that.
Okay, we do have some more info coming into the Q&A box. I don't know if this applies to your question, but one thing I am considering now is around what will it look like to put all of these components together for large-scale intervention initiatives when practicing OD, change management, et cetera.
I think that's a really good question. I think that's module 8. Connecting the dots.
You know, my thought on that question and a response to it is that certainly, you know, my ombuds experience, you're applying a variety of different techniques or processes to try to work with the conflict that's present within the organization. So at any given time, I might be using this power and conflict model to help an individual navigate up and down sort of the hierarchy and status food chain within their organization. Another time I might be using mediation because the parties realize that they need to come together and have a conversation in order to work through the disagreement or the conflict. So I might there have to apply some of the strategies from the adaptive mediation module. So, and then also cross-cultural issues play out. So I think that these different modules, these different processes apply to different conflict situations you might find yourself in within the organization. So I think one of the skills, hopefully, that participants will take away is an understanding of when these different approaches fit best given the situation you're encountering. So that would be, I think, one of the potential takeaways is when and how to apply these different processes to your given situation. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Bodi. Yeah, it's building on the experience of whatever you've learned in the program and the certificate is that you have an assortment of concepts and tools to choose from. And then depending on the assessment of the assessment tools, and depending on the assessment of the situation, you select the combination that makes the most sense to address the issues. There is another question here, comment. Somebody said, I love the large group simulations. Don't know if those still exist. I did fracking and the Niger Delta. And I'm like, that's back in time. I'm thinking about the Niger Delta one, right? I feel like I retain many learnings from those events. Any chance of doing something like that for batch 2 or batch 1 on OD and change management? Yeah, you know what's interesting is just yesterday we were having a conversation at the NECR with our program curriculum committee. We were thinking about creating a series of practical application, like several hours of simulations of case study on different industries, right? So what happens in a particular industry? So I think we're all in sync. Now, I don't know if you're planning, a simulation as such. I know you have activities planned for the modules, but is there this large scale simulation that you're planning? That would be to you, Peter.
Yeah, so that's definitely a possibility. We haven't finalized the design of the curriculum for each module. I do know that in the adaptive mediation module, Josh Flash has an extraordinary case that he was involved in directly, that we've talked about introducing as either as a case for analysis, or possibly it could be a simulation. That would be really interesting. But there's versions of that we have on Power that we could do, and certainly cross-cultural versions that we could do. And then certainly in the second round, we have DEIA cases. So it's very likely or possible that we'll either have cases that we use for analysis, or possibly some kind of simulation. The problem with simulations, again, is that you want enough time to do them and debrief them, and sometimes that can take half or most a day. So, but we'll definitely give it serious consideration because we want these to be as experiential as possible, but we would also want you to bring your cases in so that you have a lot of time to think through situations you want to think through that you're familiar with in applying the models.
I actually just see a question or a comment from Jenna Hoff. Hi, Jenna. Hope good to see you here. Jenna's question is, in answering Peter's question, I imagine that many of us are practitioners, not directly as mediators or ombuds people, etc., but also in other professions, engaging with conflict as we encounter it organically in our teams, within organizational activism, etc. So yes, Jenna, I do want to say that when I think about the different modules that we have planned, module 1 and 2 are relevant, I believe, regardless of the organizational setting you're in or how you're applying your conflict resolution certificate. So for example, if you're within a team, you will probably need to have a very good understanding of your psychological triggers, how anxiety might impact your behavior in conflict, different ways that you would navigate different situations. That all comes into play whether or not you're a mediator or an ombuds person. Also, like module 2, power and conflict, if you are, say, human resources professional, or you're just a team member on a tech team, you're navigating, whether you're conscious of it or not, power dynamics within that team. So module 2 will help you think in a very structured way how to deal with that within my team so that I can be more effective in reaching my goals, but also, developing or improving relationships. So you don't have to be a mediator per se or an ombuds person per se for these modules, I think, to be very useful.
Great, thank you. And Peter, somebody's asking, Cody's asking, can you elaborate on session 4, kind of like you did on session 3? That's the cross-cultural optimality. What would that module be?
Sure. So the model behind this is John Paul Lederach's work, Preparing for Peace, which was a critique of our field of conflict resolution that he offered several decades ago, where he said that oftentimes when you go into and work across major cultural differences, and again, that might be, me going to Zimbabwe and offering a training with a group there, or it might be me working with a Fortune Society here with ex-offenders who are coming out of prison, who have a culturally and institutionally a very different sort of experience of conflict and how to resolve it. So when you work across cultural differences that are significant like that, how do you work effectively? And his critique was, which is still holds true today, is the vast majority of conflict resolution work that's done is prescriptive. We go in, for example, to do a training. The UN does this. They go in and they do their training in other cultures and sort of say, let's change the language and change the examples, but this is how you should do it. And what research is telling us is that those types of approaches to conflict resolution training or to negotiating or mediating across cultures are oftentimes not sustainable because they don't fit with the value orientations of local actors or their sense of what is good and bad conflict, et cetera. So his critique suggested that you find ways to work more elicitatively, which means facilitating processes with local context expertise, local cultural expertise, and kind of co-build the model. However, those kinds of approaches can be very time intensive, very demanding on the stakeholders, very expensive. So the question is, how do you work in ways that are both highly sensitive and informed by cultural differences and effectively, feasible and efficient? And part of what we've learned is that there are certain conditions, whether one orientation or the other is more fitting, and that there are hybrid models that experts like Zach Matz who we've talked extensively about this and interviewed about this, has really thought through how do you do both, work in both ways simultaneously. So it is trying to work across significant cultural differences in ways that are very mindful of those differences and respectful, and allow us to add value in a conflict resolution training or negotiation or mediation approach. Does that answer your question? Whoever answered the question or asked the question?
Cody asked the question. Yes, and he smiled.
Okay, good.
Got to work the smiles, you know. Okay, does anybody have any other comments or questions, reflections? We'd love to hear them. We have about 10 more minutes. But does anybody need any information about the application process or anything like that?
So I'll just add one final pitch, which is that, you know, the good news and bad news of working at universities is that you continue to learn and develop new thinking and models and practices. And that's what we've been doing, you know, over the few decades we've been here, and will continue to do, hopefully. And so what we want to do is create a space where we can share those and workshop those with engaged people that are doing this work on the ground. And that's what this is an opportunity to do. That's why we call it a lab. And we're excited to engage with you and your colleagues from your cohort this summer and beyond.
What's the bad news? Did you say good news and bad news? I only heard good. I'll leave it at that.
Well, there's plenty of bad news. Let's just focus on the good news right now.
Focusing on the good news. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really meaningful for all of you that now after the program, after the certificate, whatever you're doing, you continue to refine your own work, your own practice, and drawing on what you learned. And I know from my own experience, I would use things that are familiar to me or use things that are handy to me, but I may forget about other things, or I may not use, and I want to go back and revisit. And a lot of what Peter mentioned has been advanced. You know, I mean, all the stuff on systemic work that the center and program have done over the years, and all of us have done, has continued to be refined and more refined over the years, considering back all those years ago when we first really started about dynamical systems and stuff. It seems so long ago. And then after we conclude the June workshops, then we'll start to promote the January workshops. We'll talk more about dates and opportunities there.
Anything else we can answer, or any concerns or we could address?
I think that's our answer.
I think you're right, Peter. I agree.
Michelle says if someone misses a session, can something.
And they make it up in further deliveries. Yeah, because the goal is not to do this one-off. The goal is that this is the pilot of some other stuff coming later. So if you're not able to make one of the sessions, then you can sign up going forward. Now, I don't know what that means in terms of payment, if that's what you're referring to, but in terms of offerings, there will probably be refined versions offered in iterative processes later on.
Yeah, that's our hope and aspiration, is that this is a pilot that will refine them, will move forward and offer these in the future, you know, either as week-long intensives or as a couple of chunks of time, as this pilot will be. We're testing this to see how it works. It might be that certain ones really resonate and others don't. So we'll learn over time and iterate, but the idea is that we'll develop these for the future.
Is this initial pilot granting a certificate?
I think that's an NECR question, but I don't know if we can.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. We can offer a certificate of completion, but this is not a certificate program.
Yeah, in order to get certification by the state, it's a 5-year-long process, and we're not there yet.
Right. So then I guess we would do two then, right? We do a conflict intelligence certification and then a systemic wisdom one.
Yes, and my understanding would be that to get the certificate of completion for part 1 and part 2, you have to do all 4 modules for part
Correct.
1.
Yeah,
and
that's correct.
2 for part 2. Okay.
Correct.
And maybe in addition to certificates, we can have swag, like big hats that say systemic intelligence or sweatshirts or I don't know, some kind of swag.
You can model that hat first, Peter.
All right.
Sounds lovely. I think we did talk about swag. I mean, we did talk about t-shirts and bags and things like that. So maybe water mugs, coffee mugs.
Something, yes.
Yeah, there should be something to commemorate it. And there'll be chocolate. There'll always be chocolate, so don't worry about that. Well, we don't need to belabor this if people don't have anything else to ask. You may think of something later and you want to reach out to us, please feel free to do so for clarification or other questions that may arise for you.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's wrap it up. Let me give you one last story, which is a moment of hope. My colleague, Andrea Bartoli, who many of you know, works closely with the Vatican, mostly in South Sudan, and trying to broker a peace process there currently. And I spoke to him this week, and he told me a story that happened early or late last week when Russia, attacked Ukraine. On that day, the Pope Francis, who's this iconoclastic Pope, woke up, heard the news, knew he couldn't get to Moscow or Kiev. So he got in a car and he drove across the square and he went to the Russian embassy. And he demanded an audience with the ambassador, who of course met him. And he said to the ambassador, we need to start back channel negotiations immediately. And the ambassador said, okay, let's do this. And so there you have a head of state, the Vatican City, and a Pope moving in unorthodox and controversial ways for peace. These kinds of things are hopeful. They can have an impact. They may not have an immediate impact, but there's a lot of good work that's happening. I will also recommend that the daily podcast from the New York Times yesterday was about the pressure campaign that's happened through the EU, Canada, the US, and the UK to try to stop the war. And it's a very impressive campaign, and it's a great story about coalition building and how to leverage that for peace. So those are just two bright spots in these very difficult times. All right, everybody, be well. Thank you for joining us, and we'll hope to see you this summer.